For this Flower Arranging Friday, we're going to create a pomander. And to do that, we're going to work with a sphere of Oasis floral foam. To make it easy on ourselves, we're choosing one that already has netting on it. And this is what it looks like when it's been soaked. And then we're also going to add just one type of flower to this, and that's a chrysanthemum. So thanks for joining us, and let's go. I mentioned that we're going to use a sphere of Oasis floral foam, and I've already soaked it, because when you work with floral foam, you want to soak it first, then work with it, because the powder of it isn't great. So make sure you read the step about how to soak floral foam and all the different tips about floral foam in that part of this lesson. Now, as I mentioned before, it comes in one of these netting, and that is so that it stays intact as you add the flowers. You also want to work with the tray, because as you add flowers, water is going to drip out of it. And I really don't want this tail part of the netting to show, so I'm going to trim that off with my cutters. And once I get flowers in there, you're not going to see it. I'm going to leave this part so I have somewhere to grab, and then also I'm going to be adding my ribbon to hang it from at this point, but I'm going to do that a little bit later because I don't want the ribbon to get wet now. So when I build this, I'm going to leave some of that open and then add at the end. I'm also going to wait until the end to add my bottoms because I don't want to crush the flowers that are going to be on the bottom. For the flower we're going to use today, we're going to use some chrysanthemums. There are lots of different kinds of chrysanthemums, and you want to stick with ones that have a fairly small head, because this is a small pomander. You don't want to have something with large heads, because then the stems are too big, they would fall out. So if you want to do something like this with another kind of flower, make sure you stick with small-headed flowers, like small spray roses or spray carnations, not the standard carnations, the small ones. So we're going to use chrysanthemums. You could also use little daisy mums or other little pom-pom mums. So I took some of the spray mums already, and I added a few to show you. You want to pick the larger faced ones to go around the middle, because then as we graduate up towards the top or the bottom, you want to go with the smaller heads. So I'm picking my flowers here. I have about, let's see, 8 or 9 stems of spray mums. So spray mum means you have more than one flower on the end, and so you have a lot to choose from as far as different sizes. And you want to make sure you condition these flowers just like you would other flowers up until you're ready to use them. And as I'm placing them in, I'm only putting in about 1.5 inches of the stem, because you can't put too long of a stem inside this small sphere, otherwise the stems will start to run into each other. So as you can see now, I have like a little around the edge, around the middle, kind of like it looks like a Saturn ring. So now I need to start coming up to the top, and I want to go with maybe a little bit slightly smaller heads, and I'm going to go kind of in between each one, placing within 10 seconds because of that 10-second rule of stems sealing up. So now I'm starting to come up the sphere. And you want to make sure that you cover all the foam so you don't see any foam, but you're putting them slightly apart from each other. You be careful, that one I just bent. So these are soft, pretty soft stems, so you want to be careful sticking them in. And if you have a problem with the stems bending, an idea is you can take another stem like this, and you can pre-poke a little bit of a hole to get that hole started, and that way you're not going to bend the flower stem. So I'm coming up on my row. I have about four more to go on this second row above the middle. And when we get to the end, we'll do a count, and then I can see if my 40 stems or 40 flowers is the right estimate for this size, for these. It all depends on how big the flowers are that you're using, how big the faces are. And as I said, I started with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, actually I only have 7 stems here, but if you get a bunch, you'll get 10. So 10 might be enough to do your whole entire sphere. Yeah, it's bending again. This one's a little too big, so I'm going to go with one of these smaller ones, and I already have the hole. Now if you have a hole that you've poked that's too big and it's not staying in, then you're going to want to choose a new hole to place in, because you don't want to have these flowers popping out. So I'm almost done with the top. And remember, I'm going to cover that that netting at the end when I add my ribbon. So it's always a finishing touch you have to do. So here I'm almost, I think I need to go get a few more stems. So I've done the top. Cute, huh? Okay, I'll be back with the rest. I'm back, and this is part of the lesson, is you try to figure out how many flowers you need and you estimate, and then sometimes you don't have enough. So the lesson here is, if you have to do this for a big event, you want to mock it up so you can tell, and then you want to order a little bit more, because each stem is going to have a different amount of flowers on it. So you might say, oh, I need 8 stems of mums, but what if one of those stems only has like 2 blooms that are usable? Maybe they've bent. So you need to keep that in mind. Okay. So we've done the top half of our design, and now we want to do our bottom half, and you don't want to crush these guys, so you want to be careful as you're handling this. And so what I'm going to do is, I have a little pot here that I can rest it on when I'm to that point where I have to set it down. So this is where you might want to just hold it in your non-dominant hand, and then use your dominant hand to cut and place. So you're kind of, I'm still working over my tray for the drips, catching the drips. And another thing about catching drips is, when we are done, you want to put it in a container like this, so that any other dripping happens before you hand it off to the client. You don't need to put this in a refrigerator or anything after. It's got plenty, it's soaked plenty. You could spray it with Crowning Glory at the end, which is a finishing spray that helps lock in the hydration on the petals. Or another kind is called Finishing Touch. I'll put that on the supplies list for you. Just give it a nice spray. But because it's in floral foam and it's getting plenty of water, this will last like about a week, believe it or not. As long as it's not super dry desert windy conditions, you should be fine on how long this lasts. So I'm placing this in. So now I need to get the bottom covered, but it's looking almost like a finished pomander. A lot of people I mentioned the flower girls and how if they're small, this might be too heavy for them. Plus they might swing it around and it could knock into things. So you might want to consider an alternative. Pomanders are really kind of heavy for little flower girls to carry. So maybe just a spray of flowers tied to a ribbon, or a ringlet. So a ring of flowers, like a little wreath that they can carry on a ribbon, maybe is a little more practical and a little bit more easy for a little flower girl to carry. Pomanders would look great as aisle decor. They can also look cute on the back of chairs or hanging from tall candelabras. There's a lot of uses for pomanders. Maybe not always such a great idea for the flower girls, but if your bride's set on it, then by all means, go for it. Just give her a heads up that they are heavy, and it depends on the maturity of the flower girl. We've done these actually for bridesmaids bouquets, and then at the reception they went on the back of chairs. So now that's the bottom. So now we've finished our pomander. So now I'd have to count. So I'll do that count at the end, and then I'll tell you how many I did. And you can see right now it's dripping. Oops, I didn't do that bottom one long enough. So this is why you want to, so maybe for that bottom one I have to keep the stem a little bit on the long side. make sure I don't put it in the same hole so it stays attached. So that's a little bit better. I think it was too big of a flower. Okay, so we have our pomander and it's dripping a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to gently place it on my container, and it will, it will compress a little bit, but these are pretty resilient flowers, and what you might want to do is maybe change. If you leave it down like this, then no one's really going to see if it got a little bit on the crushed side. So this part I want to trim also, because I don't want to see that now that I'm done holding it with that. And I'm going to take my ribbon. It's always good to take about 1.5 yards when you're measuring ribbon. We're at the final stage, and I promised that I would tell you how many flowers I used. So I used 36 heads of cushion mums. So it's about right, about 40 stems for a 4-inch sphere. So think about 4-inch sphere, 40 stems, 6-inch sphere, 60 stems, and so on. Now it will depend on how many. When I say stems, I mean faces of flowers. So the stems of the mums, I think I used about 10 stems of mums, but it will depend on how many sprays are at the end of each mum. Okay, so I have some ribbon, and sometimes it's nice to have thick ribbon, or you can have a thinner ribbon. If you have a thicker ribbon, it's going to be easier to carry. If you have a thin, not as wide ribbon, it's going to be harder to carry. But the part that's going to be hard is threading this part through that narrow opening up here. So I'm going to look for the netting, and I'm going to push it through to get it underneath where that part was gathered, and then I'm going to pull it. And what I want to do, the reason also why I like having the wide ribbon, is I can tie it and cover up that green part, the netting part, so no one will see the architecture. So I'm going to keep that knot kind of wide and fluff it over the green part so you can't see it. So now, then I'm going to tie it again just to make sure you can't see. So now it's ready for hanging. Now at this point it can hang from a shepherd's hook, it can hang from a chandelier, it can hang from an aisle decor, so you can keep it long, or you can tie it. And a simple way to tie is to just take both ends and wrap them around together and tie it like that. And the reason why we like doing that is because that is a really secure way to do a knot, and so when you lift it up, it's not going to slip. Knots can be tricky. So, and if it needs to be shorter, then you just go down further. Then I kept my nice ribbon scissors here, and I'm going to cut that ribbon, give it a nice clean angle, because it got a little bit messy when I strung it through the netting. So there we have it, a 4-inch pomander with about almost 40 faces of cushion mums with a nice, beautiful grosgrain ribbon ready to carry or hang.